Yes.
Including things that, I don't know if you can see it down there, but there's a thing filled with green, a weird bottle that is mostly invisible unless I turn on the black light. At which point suddenly it becomes, it sort of overwhelms the
I like that. I want a bottle of green in my frame.
So, yes, that's my black light.
You scare the kiddies. Very good.
Thank you. It was the most fun I've actually had on Halloween in ages.
Oh, great. That's good to hear.
It was just sort of, and right now everything's great because I have a daughter here. So
fantastic.
Always good to have a daughter.
It is the best. We are as rich as we have daughters. And Maddie came in a week ago, and actually more than that, she came in 12 days ago. She's got 5 days left of quarantine, and then we're allowed out of the house together to actually go places rather than just sort of walk and disturb the sheep.
I'm delighted. I'm so glad she's there with you. That's really good.
Me too. It's a good thing. We walked over to my island at low tide the other day.
Oh, this is good.
Father-daughter walks are very important. I had a lot of father-daughter walks.
They really are. They so are.
Do you sing?
We sing when we're in the car together. We don't sing when we're just walking, because I think that might, it is possible that somebody half a mile away might hear us, and then Maddie would be embarrassed. But you're okay in the car as long as all the windows are up. Then we can sing because nobody will hear her.
I used to sing like songs in the round with Dad, like the Monty Python's Rhubarb Tart song. And I don't think he taught me to correct words, but so we used to sing the Rhubarb Tart song with the wrong words over and over again. And Whose Pigs Are These that I've never heard of outside of the Pratchett family. Yeah, so yeah, lots of singing in the round and wildlife fleeing before us, that kind of thing. It's all good times.
How are we doing time-wise, Rebecca?
We do good. We've got around 300 people, so we're just waiting for a few more.
Okay.
I have no idea that just so you know, we are live because all of our mics are on. So we are actually being listened to by people right now. We're going, do they know about the Rhubarb?
I'm happy to share details of the Rhubarb Tart song.
Okay.
It's all good.
We wouldn't give any secrets away while we're waiting for the rest of the people to join, though, would we, chaps? No.
Oh, but everybody's going to think my candles are probably
Okay.
I'm happy to share details of the Rhubarb Tart song. I keep hearing myself coming back to me about 30 seconds later. Is that the delay on it?
While we're waiting for the rest of the people to join, though, would we, chaps? No.
Okay.
everybody's going to think my candles are probably going.
Okay. I think
I'm happy to share details.
if everyone's okay, I think
I keep hearing myself coming back to me about 30 seconds later.
I think we'll make a start. Okay. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight.
Is everyone getting the sound?
Okay.
I keep hearing myself coming back to me about 30 seconds later.
I think we'll make a start. Okay. Thanks everyone for joining us. I've just muted Rob, Rhianna, and Neil for the time being, so sorry about that.
But is everyone getting the sound? I keep hearing myself coming back to me about 30 seconds later.
Okay. Thanks everyone for joining us. I've just muted Rob, Rhianna, and Neil for the time being, so sorry about that.
Is everyone getting the sound?
Senate House Library is absolutely thrilled to host this in-conversation event with best-selling author Neil Gaiman, Rob Wilkins, Terry Pratchett's close friend and colleague, and Rhianna Pratchett, video game writer, and of course, Terry Pratchett's daughter. There will be around 30 minutes roundtable discussion with our very special guests, and then will be around 15 minutes for Q&As, which will be managed by the chat. We hope you enjoy the event, and we'll now hand over to Rob Wilkins, who will lead the event.
There we go. Okay, there's no point in me asking you all to raise a hand if you can hear me. I'm just going to have to go into this and hope you can. But can Neil and Rhianna hear me?
Yes.
Yes, fantastic. And I can see the comments at the bottom of the screen. Okay, something very strange was going on there, and I'm not sure entirely what it was, but we are here now. Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'd like to introduce to you Rhianna Pratchett. Hurrah! And Mr. Neil Gaiman.
Hello. Thank you for coming.
What can I possibly say to introduce you to? I mean, really, what can I add to that to introduce you? Over to you two to do that.
Well, I do write other things apart from video games.
Go for it, girl. Tell us.
Oh, I do comics and films and TV and short stories and non-fiction and novels now. Game books, Crystal of Storms, little plug for Crystal of Storms. But yeah, all sorts of things, all the write-ins.
All the writings, fantastic. And Mr. Neil Gaiman, tell us a little bit about yourself, sir.
Well, I have known Rhianna since she was about 12. When, if memory serves, she was, Terry bragged that she was a member of the William Club, the Just William Club.
The Outlaw Club, yeah.
The Outlaw Club. And we were using her as a reader and advisor on Good Omens, which had started life as a piece of essentially Good Omens fan fiction. What do? I like Rhianna. I have written all sorts of things, comics and books for adults, books for kids. The latest two are Pirate Stew, which is that. Now I even have a copy here because I just did a reading to a Waterstones winner. And the other one, which is enormous, is that, which you really could. I mean, you could cause damage with this book. This is, you know, you don't even have to read it. Just hit people with it.
But what's there, Neil? What is between the covers of said tome? What is it?
Oh, it's stuff I wrote. What is it? It's 47 short stories picked from a total of about 150 possibles by people voting on the internet, and also 5 extracts from novels. And really the point of that book, as I explain in the introduction, is it's for when people say, so what do you do? What kind of thing do you write? And I start saying, well, all sorts of things. And they say, well, what does that mean then? And, you know, have I heard of you? And I will say no. And they say, well, what of yours should I read? Now I can just say, well, you should, you know, the Neil Gaiman reader. It is there for people who might like me, but don't know if they would. And it's got lots of stuff in. And as Terry and I used to say, it's a lot like the early They Might Be Giants albums, in which it didn't really matter if you didn't like a song because there'd be another one along in a minute and a half.
That's so true. I think there should be a little bit of a structure to our chat. So I'm going to jump in with the brief outline. If we said that there's 4 things I would like to cover right now, and I think the first one would really is very general. It's talking about the Discworld universe. So you two, by default, were there before me. Rhianna, you were there before Neil. The Discworld universe, Terry would always be quite modest about it and point out that, do you know what, in every area of whatever, that you will find a turtle swimming through space with some elephants on it. There's an Atuan-shaped hole in any mythology, wherever you are. So can you remember, Rhianna, the first time that Discworld became part of your world? Can you remember?
Well, I was talking about it on Twitter quite recently. It was when it was serialized, Equal Rights was serialized on Woman's Hour. And I think this was 1987, so it's the year it was published. And I don't think I'd taken that much interest in what Dad did up until that point, because it's just what your dad does. And it took him away from me a lot. And so maybe I probably resented it a little bit. And I knew he used to shut himself in a room and work very hard. And I don't think I knew that much about what he did, because I found picture books around that time or when I was younger. And I never talked about my dad being a writer. I was always talking about going for walks or his hat. Like I would draw like blobby pictures of his hat. But it was equal rights on Women's Hour, and that was a big deal to me, because Women's Hour was sacred in our house. Mum used to listen to Women's Hour, like it was on all the time. If Dad had got onto Women's Hour, then he must be doing something amazing. Women's Hour. And I remember recording it off the radio on a bright yellow tape recorder, and I listened to it over and over again. And that's when I thought, okay, I kind of like this, and started reading more of his books after that. So Equal Rights was my first introduction. And I think that might have gone and read the book as well. So I must have been about 8 or 9 then.
Fantastic. That's brilliant itself. I could see it. I'm not going to throw anything else into this. I just want to hear you talk about about that relationship and about that, how amazing it must have been then, because your dad was barely Terry Pratchett then. Let's be honest.
Yeah, I mean he was always dad. He's always dad to me. He's sort of never really Terry Pratchett. But some things started making sense. It was like, oh, is this why we have a lot of tortoises, or like, you know, have our tortoises inform the books, or have the books kind of spawned our tortoises and things like that. And sort of I noticed lots of little things, and Escarina Smith is the only character that my dad has come out and said it was based on me when I was around 8 years old. And I thought that was kind of pretty cool. I think there's a bit of me in a lot of his younger female characters. But Esk was the one he said was kind of more openly based on me. So I think that drew me in.
I have to be honest, one of the things that I find cool is not just the fact that you share your father's DNA, but as a young reader, when I opened Mort and it was dedicated to you, and so therefore my favorite book dedicated to you, that's cool.
I mean, not the most emotional of dedicators, my father. So I think it was just to Rhianna. Then I think there was another one to Rhianna. Yeah, another one to Rhianna. I think there was to Lynn and Rhianna and the crocodile that ate the sandwiches at Kennedy Space Center.
There was.
So indeed. Yeah, I did get some dedications, but yeah, I think Mort is the one I sort of remember the most, I think. And I think there's been a few babies named Rhianna because of people seeing that dedication as well, which is pretty cool.
And then let me say, though, that the actual written dedication to Mort, Neil told me a number of years ago that he had a very special dedication in the front of Mort. And Neil, it actually sounded too good to be true. It actually sounded that maybe you put some polish on this, you know?
I was really sorry that when I wrote that introduction to the new edition of Mort and I sent over a scan of what Terry wrote, that they didn't print the scan at the bottom.
Yeah.
Because my copy of my proof, it's not even a finished copy of Mort. It's one of those early blue Golanx proof floppy things. Just says to Neil Gaiman, in the hopes that he won't tell everybody that it was all his idea. Terry Pratchett. And that is because Terry, after Equal Rights, he told me he was done with Discworld. And he was like, no, I've done Discworld. I've done 2 books and I've done Equal Rights and I'm done with it and I'm going to do The Long Earth. And he started explaining a version of The Long Earth to me, which was going to be this giant science fiction mega masterwork that he was going to then invest the rest of his career in doing. And I listened to it for a long time, and it was very interesting. We got to the end and I said, well, that sounds terrific, but I wish you'd write a book about death because he's your best character. And about 2 days later, and this was at a convention, I think in Leeds, and 2 days later, we were back from the convention and the phone rang and I picked it up and the voice at the other end just said, "You bastard, it's called Mort." And that was, so it was in the doomed hope that I wouldn't tell everybody it was all my idea.
And there it was, and they didn't print it. It was the, oh dear, never mind. I'm going to skip straight on to my second point, which I want to just talk about the creative process, because for everybody watching this, and it seems very odd that you can't see an audience when we're doing this, by the way. I always think we are just talking amongst ourselves. So let's just talk amongst ourselves about the creative process, because we three are three of the luckiest people in the world, as far as I'm concerned, for lots of reasons. But for one reason is that we saw Discworld novels being created in front of us. In fact, your intro, Neil, for Slip of the Keyboard, you said that how lucky you were that you have seen them created in front of you.
You know what's interesting is I knew how lucky I was. A lot of the times history is happening and big important things are happening and you really have no idea. But with Terry, I knew that something special was going on. I remember him phoning me up and saying, you know, he'd finished, I think it must have been Mort, and had, and his whole thing was he would get home from work and he would write 400 words. And he would do his 400 words. And he'd finish Mort and it was 180 words. So he still had 220 words to go. And he opened a new screen and typed, "When shall we three meet again? Well, I can't do Tuesday." And began a book with no idea where it was going or what was happening to it. And then phone me up to tell me. And he would phone and send me things. I would get floppy disks back in the days when you actually really had to reinforce things with cardboard and write rude notes to stop the postman folding them in half to put them through the letterbox. And these floppies would contain, you know, 5,000, 10,000 words of whatever Terry was writing. And it would be magical because I'd get to watch it happening around me. And I couldn't believe how lucky I was.
Rhianna, can you remember a book in its infancy before it became the book? Because that's what I'll talk about in a minute, my recollection of that. But can you remember that?
Not much. I mean, Dad and I used to go on walks a lot, and he used to talk at me a lot, and time again throughout the years. And I think he wasn't really telling me about it; he was telling himself about it. So sometimes just sort of talking, working out an idea was something he kind of liked to do, and he would often just sort of talk as we were walking along. And so I think there's everything in there, but there's nothing that I remember specifically talking about. But he did sometimes nick my jokes, and I'd find them popping up, or like silly things that he'd find me saying to the cats and that sort of thing. So the "Where Has All the Custard Gone" song that I think in Longford they used to time boiling eggs was something I used to say to my tubby cat when he got a little less tubby but still had lots of floppy skin. I used to poke him and say, "Where has all the custard gone?" And that became one. I think, and I used to call the cat Tub Pajama Man, and I think that maybe became a fool in one of the Fools Guild. So that he was always kind of nicking bits from life. But no, I don't think there's any one particular book, but he always used to talk about them a lot. But it was because I think he needed to just talk to himself about it, and it was easier if there was someone else there.
Yeah, we were all blessed with those phone calls. Neil knows how they went. You'd get a phone call from Terry and he'd say, "Here, you know how this one goes," and then you get 30 minutes. But then when he got to the point where he had told himself the story, the phone would go down. There'd be no cheerio, no see you later or whatever. The phone would go down and he would be gone. And you knew that there was a race back to the keyboard. You knew that would happen. But what I remember...
I get phone calls from him that would start, yeah, it's me. Listen, which is funnier? And then he would lay out two things. Yeah. And normally, I think one of the reasons he liked me was normally I'd listen to it and I'd say, well, can't you do both? And he'd go, how? And I'd say, well, you could do this and you could also have this going on. And he'd go, all right, and the phone would go down.
Phone would go down.
And you know that he was off writing.
Yeah, yeah. The memory I have is the memory I have that you could transpose onto every book. Is that a book would be finished, and I think, dear listeners, dear watchers, you probably think that somebody as successful as Terry Pratchett would have a wall full of post-it notes with scenes laid out carefully, with our beginning, our middle, and the end. And the big twist, the car chase, the space aliens, whatever you want. We would have none of that. We would have none of that. What we would have actually is a very excited Terry Pratchett who long ago has finished the book that you're going to get in your Hogswatch stocking. Okay, so that book has been finished a year, 18 months ago. And the book that we are now working on is not the next book, because we've got to the boring bit of that. We've got to the bit where we've got to pull everything together. We're at the honeymoon period of not the next book, maybe even the book after that. But that's the bit that Terry was most excited about. But he wouldn't know what the story was. And I remember, and I always tell the story of Unseen Academicals, that you will not find two guys anywhere in the multiverse who know less about football than Terry and myself, and yet we're working on a book called Unseen Academicals about football on Discworld. And I remember the day that Terry burst through the chapel door just down here and said, "Here, I've got it. The thing about football, the really important thing about football is that it's not all about the football." And he went on to list the hats, the scarves, the chanting, the pies, very important, the pies. But what he'd done, we'd started the book, we'd gone into the creative process, a book had been started, and we had put a tent peg somewhere pretty much dead center in the novel, and we just started working in both directions. And for me, the memory of being there at the coalface while Terry was creating that, I can't tell you how exciting it was. It was fantastic. And we would obviously, we would hit dead ends. We would hit, we would paint ourselves into a corner. And I think for me, that was an exciting time as well, because Terry painted himself into a corner, and he could have had anybody anywhere on the disc wave a magic wand, a spell would be spoke, and that's our get out of jail free card. And Terry would never ever do that. He would never do that. We would spend a lot of time working our way out of the corner that we have intentionally painted ourselves into. And it wasn't until I heard an interview with Vince Gilligan, the creator of Breaking Bad, that I realized that he did the same. And I was just so delighted to hear that it wasn't unique, but the brain power it took. It's one of the reasons why I'm ever so sorry, everybody, that Terry got fed up with Doctor Who in the end, because he got fed up with the waving of a sonic screwdriver. Not your episode, Neil, or episodes, I would like to say. But there we are. And the other thing, actually, because sitting on my lap at the moment, I have to show you the real way that we got out of our sticky corners, is that we used to ask the advice of somebody very important. We used to ask the advice of Mr. Knitted Man, didn't we? He was the one. Terry used to say, Terry would get fan mail asking Terry, "Where do you get your funny ideas from?" And in the latter years, we would say, from him, Mr. Knitted Man. He can go back to rest now. So yes, in the time we've got, and we're already at 6:24, and so we're not really even up to point 3 yet that I wanted to get to. But we talked briefly, everything's going to be briefly about the creative process, but I just wanted to touch on the technology of writing as well, because your dad, Rhianna, embraced technology like nobody else. And I have a few regrets over the years. And one of them is never having the lightest laptop that your dad designed. We ended up with a Toshiba something or other that was reasonably light, but it wasn't that light. And now with our iPads and our iPhones, I'm going to just quickly show the viewer this before I ask you about your creative process. But Terry would, there we go, an original Palm Pilot. an upgraded Palm Pilot, and a slightly more upgraded Palm Pilot. And here we go. You imagine editing, or not even editing, actually writing a raw Discworld novel on a very early Bluetooth keyboard. That's what we used to work
What
on.
about the Atari Portfolio?
Oh,
I still have somewhere in a drawer the Atari Portfolio that Terry talked me into buying, with the incredibly upgraded, from a man that Terry knew, upgraded weird sort of square disc thing that you'd put in, and store everything on, which I think had a whole megabyte of information you could fit on it if you bought this expensive from the man that Terry knew. So yes.
I haven't got that, but I have got this. Can you remember this? That was Terry's first proper, real, genuine laptop. That was the Olivetti Quaderno. Sorry, it wasn't the Quaderno. This is the libretto. Sorry, people would correct me. So
I remember his libretto, because he taught me, I mean, with all of this stuff, he would talk me into getting one.
Yeah, and me.
And he'd always sort of, and there was a place in Chicago that Terry discovered that imported micro computers from Japan and then retooled them with a sort of English, changed the keyboard structure and stuff. And Terry would always talk me into buying things from them because they were lighter.
Yes.
But I remember for me, the big moment of Terry and technology was he came to my house to work on Good Omens. And he came and stayed over, and we were working together, and he said, yeah, your display is in color. And I said, yes, Terry, my display is in color. And he said, mine isn't in color. Why did you spend the extra £300, whatever it was, on the VGA color screen instead of just a normal amber one? And I said, well, I figured I'm spend my entire life in front of this screen, making things up, and I need to make my time here as comfortable as I possibly can. And he said, oh. And I got a phone call from him the next week saying, I bought a VGA color screen, and I think I may adopt your statement as a philosophy of life from here on out. And just the idea that, if you're going to be there, you may as well, and no money spent on making things comfortable and pleasant for yourself is, while you're making the stuff up, is actually wasted, because it's encouraging you to be there and put the words down. And if you aren't doing that, then nothing at all is happening.
Which is why we used to sit in front of 6 monitors. And Rhianna, can you remember what your father said when asked the question, why have you got 6 monitors?
Because I haven't got room for 8.
Is the right answer. And entirely true it was. Oh, we could talk about that part. I love the technology of writing. I love how in 100 years' time, we would have plugged ourselves into some kind of neural network, and the words would have still found their way out of your dad's head and down onto the screen. But whatever we used, whatever technology we had, we would never get away from those exciting moments when I would leap from my seat and I would punch the air, and I would look down and I could see the rim of your dad's hat, and I could just see him nodding gently because he knew he'd got me. He'd got me. We'd gone on a journey, and he knew that I would know where we were going, and we would get to a crossroads, and I think, here we go, I'm going to change gear, we're going to go left, and I know where we're going. And every time he would change down for me, and we would go off in a completely different direction. And I can't tell you the pleasure that it gave me to do that, being there at that moment and leaping from my seat. Go, I think it's time you ought to put the kettle on. And that was it. We're going to get to Q&As in a minute before we even know it, but I feel that we ought to jump forward. And my fourth point here is the legacy of Terry Pratchett, his relevance today and the future. I'm going to quickly start with something, because I'm going to ask myself the question, what did Terry talk about the future? Well, at Terry's memorial, I said, I asked the question that Terry asked, and that was, what do you want from your memorial, Terry? And Terry said, to be there. And so when I think of the future, I think the one thing that Terry would want from the future is to be there. But I asked him the question, and I think it was on one of the Shakespeare anniversaries. Terry, do you think people will be reading your books in 300 years' time? And without a pause, he said, good God, no. We'll all be eating each other in 300 years' time. And that was his answer. So that was the legacy. So over to you two. Where do you feel the legacy, Terry's relevance today and into the future?
I think that I'm not sure that everything that Terry has written will work 150 years from now. I think some of it will be like Dickens, where you have things like the bad ballads, sketches by Boz, or, you know, there's the stuff that was very much dependent on its time and on you really understanding what was going on. But then there's the power of the novels, and you don't have to know everything about Victorian England to go Bleak House is a powerful and brilliant book, or whatever. And I think the books that will absolutely work are the ones which rely on how human beings work,
yeah,
and who we are and what we care about. And which I suspect means that the Vimes novels will last well, the Witch novels will last well. I suspect that Terry's children's fiction will be read 500 years from now. I think that's just gonna last. You know, Maurice and you know, I think they'll last. But the truth is, all you can do is write the book that you're on and hope. And you're never hoping that someone's going to be reading you 500 years from now. You're hoping that somebody will be reading this book 3 weeks after it's published and caring and liking it and buying it. And, you know, for me, that was what Terry was really most interested in, was just, you write the next book and you make it as good as you possibly can.
Absolutely. Rhianna, what do you think, legacy-wise? Because the legacy rests on your shoulder, because I could mention Narrativia at this point.
Gosh, thank you for the pressure there, Rob. Yeah, I mean, I think the same as Neil, the books will I think they'll stand the test of time, and particularly ones, you know, Neil was mentioning Dad's children's work. I mean, the Tiffany Aching series. I love the Witches. I love the Witches most, I think, because I started with Equal Rights, and I think the Witch series and the Tiffany series are so brilliant. And Nation as well. And Nation is actually, now thinking back, I think it's the book that my dad spoke to me most about, and I know it's the one he wanted me to adapt, which is kind of on the back burner, but that was one that I think that will stand the test of time. I know it's sort of its standalone one, but it's a really beautiful novel. And you know, I use Twitter a lot, and I always see Dad's quotes. There's a Pratchett quote for every occasion. The political climate at the moment is ripe for Pratchett quotes, and I see a lot of them going round. The Vimes's boot theory is a very popular one, and yeah, there is the quotable Pratchett, I think, will last. And obviously you and I are running Narrativia, and we've got various exciting things in the works that we can't talk about there, but they are very exciting, and hopefully we will have more news in the not too distant future. That's probably about as much as I can say. And yeah, it is legacy is a funny thing. It is an odd situation to find yourself having to carry someone else's legacy whilst also trying to do your own thing, and balancing that out. And that is quite a lot to take on. And I think it's sort of, I still don't think I'm quite balanced yet, but I'm a little bit more balanced than I used to be, because I didn't used to have a lot to do with Discworld for a while, because I was trying to do my own thing and you know, find out what I wanted to do and find my path. And then obviously when we started Narrativia, I came to the table a bit more and was involved more, and that's kind of slowly increased, and I've kind of, it's gone on the right pace. Like, I couldn't completely jump in. I had to come to it through my own steam when I felt most comfortable doing it, when I felt like I had a lot of work under my belt from the other mediums I worked in, to bring something to the table, not just being his daughter, but being a writer in my own right, and having worked on adaptations in the past. So yeah, it is a kind of interesting situation to find yourself in, having to create your own legacy whilst also holding up someone else's at the same time. But you know, and this is why I thank all the gods for having you here, because you know, you've made my life so much easier, and it's so wonderful to have Narrativia with you. And I think Dad would be very proud with what we're planning, and yeah, all the secrets, all the secrets.
Of which we can tell none. I suppose the one that we can mention, if anybody hasn't realised, that the news, the Morris cast news is out there with Hugh Laurie playing Morris. I mean, we absolutely could not be happier. There you go. Really, really happy. I think the thing for me that having spent so long at the coalface on these things, and you just pray for that piece of casting that's going to absolutely nail it, and we have on multiple levels with Morris, and I'm eternally grateful. Neil, I have to mention your tweet about the amazing Morris, where you talk about people were referencing the source material, and it made me slightly, I got a little bit miserable for a moment, where people were questioning the sort of authenticity of Morris. And I was thinking, no, Rhianna and myself, we're there, we're at the front line. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. The guys behind Morris are great. It's going to be wonderful. Everything that we've seen so far is going to be wonderful. And when a couple of people were saying, yeah, but what if? And then Neil jumped on it. Can I read your tweet out, Neil?
Go for it.
You said, but the fan base are fans, and they like the source material because it's the source material they like. So if you do something else, you risk alienating the fans on a monumental scale. It's not Batman if he's now a news reporter in a yellow trench coat with a pet bat. I want a pet bat now.
Yeah, I think that launched a lot of people wanting pet bats.
Yeah, they do, yeah, absolutely. I'll be honest though, I would like a yellow trench coat as well, actually, if that's okay. If you don't mind.
Everyone was going, that would be a great Batman.
Yeah. We know what you meant. We know exactly what you meant, and we appreciate that. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, it meant a lot to both of us. Thank you. And here we are at nearly 20 to 7. We've got here very flipping quickly. The questions are coming in faster than I can even take note of. At this point, do we ask the representatives, Rebecca of Senate House Library, will you pop back on with some questions if you have any that you can share with us?
There's lots of them down at the bottom of the screen.
I'd love to give a big thank you to all three of you on behalf of everyone joining us tonight. That's an amazing conversation. And I know we've already got a number of questions already lined up. So I'm just going to go through a few of them now. But starting off with one, which is quite popular, which is to Rhianna. Everyone wants to know who the little fella on your sofa is.
Yeah, I saw some people think it was Gollum. It's actually one of my dad's old toys that he gave to me. It's a very well-loved, partly sewn-up Dalmatian dog that originally went by the name of Dismal Desmond, and my dad called him Fun, and then I drew a smile on his very depressed face. And he only has one ear, and he's like got half a tail, and his tummy's got like a patch on him. But I wanted him to be involved because he was sort of passed on to me via dad. So that's Fun in the background.
Brilliant.
Wonderful. We've got a question here from James Cummings. Given the way that Terry Pratchett's novels concerning technological development are always bound to cultural and social shifts, how do you think this reflects Terry's own relationship with technology?
Neil, how do you feel about that?
I think Terry was a fantasy writer with the mind of a science fiction writer. And by that, I mean, he was most interested in how things were put together and how they got there. I remember, many years before he wrote The Truth, he was writing about trying to write a Discworld newspaper novel. And what fascinated him, what he was trying to talk about, was how newspapers grew out of sending your person somewhere and having them write letters home, and following the evolution of a newspaper as a science fiction writer would look at it, going, okay, this happens, then this happens, then this happens. And then you get to newspapers. How do I do that? He would go on the disc. And so he was always fascinated by technology, because he was fascinated by how people build things, how people make things, how, the last book I remember him urging me to read was one about feeding Nelson's sailors?
Feeding Nelson's Navy.
Nelson's Navy, yeah.
Feeding Nelson's Navy. It was like, you have to read this because, okay, you've got these ships and they have the people on it. How do you feed them? Where does the food come from? And Terry was absolutely fascinated always by the mechanics of how things worked. And then he would translate how things worked into a fantastic context. So the technology, I don't think Terry's technology is going to date very often, because it's always goes back to first principles. It's almost never magic, unless Terry decides to do the kind of gag he did where somebody nearly invents the camera and then discovers there really are little imps inside drawing the pictures.
Yeah. Excellent, great question. Any more, Rebecca?
Yes, so we've got one from Patrick Mahon, which is, what's your warmest memory of living with Terry?
Rhianna, you better go first on that one.
Oh God, there's just too many. Dad and I used to have what he dubbed quality time. You'll probably remember this, Rob. And this was when Dad sort of tried to be fatherly, a bit like Tepic's dad in Pyramids, actually. When he would kind of come and be fatherly at me, and I think it was probably after his Alzheimer's diagnosis, because I think we had lots of deep chats then, and I just bought him a Starfield, a really good Starfield, and we were sitting on the landing in the house, and we had a couple of beers and we had the Starfield going, and we were just chatting away, and that's one I remember a lot. I remember the first Christmas in Wiltshire, and we walked across the hills to my grandmother's village, which was a couple of villages away from ours, and we were singing the Rhubarb Tart song and Whose Pigs Are These very loudly on Christmas morning, with wildlife fleeing before us, and it was really joyful. And so yeah, that little moments on walks, and just when it was just the kind of two of us chatting are the ones I think I remember the most.
I remember getting the phone call when the work is done for the day, where everything's done, everything's packed down. I've probably left your dad in front of Oblivion, a games machine that was just here, and that would be it for the day. That would be it until the phone call came in, maybe 11 o'clock, maybe midnight. Do you fancy a beer? And the roof, the lid is off the observatory, and I would come up and the observatory would be open, and we'd have a look at the stars together, we'd have a beer, and now it's 1 o'clock in the morning, and he'd say, do you fancy doing a little light work? And everything that had been building up to that moment, we would then sit down and we would have a final bash at the end of the day. And I think when the phone wasn't ringing, there was no emails pinging in, it was just the two of us. We'd had a cold beer outside in the cold, looking at the stars, realizing how completely insignificant our existence was. But then we're going to sit back down at the keyboard and maybe do another 1,000 words tonight, sitting there. And I always felt that everything we did, because I'm a great reader myself, everything that we were doing was for the readers. That was what everything we did, we thought about the readers. But I'm sorry to say, on nights like that, it was just for the two of us, and I loved those moments, and they are the moments that I cherish the most and miss the most. Neil, how about you?
I think my favorite moments with Terry, some of them were over food, but even more than the ones that were over food, because Terry and I would wind up meeting all over the planet. We'd be, we'd decide, we'd both get talked into going to the Gothenburg Book Festival to launch this Swedish Good Omens, mostly just because we wanted to be there. Or we'd find ourselves somewhere, and Terry would always have got hold of a bottle of something alcoholic and glorious, often ice wine.
Yep.
And, toward the end of the day, he'd just say, hey, do you want to come up to my hotel room? And I've got a bottle of something. And I think you might, let's just have some ice wine and talk. And that, for me, was always the best, because it was, especially toward the end, in Terry's sort of, the last decade or so, where I got the feeling that he didn't have that many friends who had been around for a long time and to whom he could talk about what was going on completely honestly. Yeah. He just sort of, there were few people he could actually talk about the problems of being Terry Pratchett to, because most of the problems of being Terry Pratchett would sound to most people like, how can these be problems? You are one of the best-selling authors on the face of the planet. You are beloved. But he was at least sort of, I went back far enough, and I had my own following and my own career, that we could just sit there and drink ice wine and set the world to rights, and that's what I miss the most.
Yeah.
Oh, I've got one good image I'd like to put in the audience's mind. It was a Christmas at the cottage when we were still in Somerset, and Dad cooked, and I think both of you all know what a rare occurrence that was. And we each cooked a dish each, and he cooked the most peppery watercress soup. And he did it whilst wearing an apron and a chef's hat and enormous fluffy bee slippers. And that is an enduring memory of my dad's peppery watercress soup with the fluffy bee slippers and the chef's hat on, because it was just, it was comical and rare and kind of wonderful.
Oh, so true. We were as domesticated as each other. On one occasion when we would only ever fall out over the words. And I sat at the keyboard one day and I was bashing away at what we'd just been working on. And he knew that I was grumpy about something. And he appeared from the kitchen holding the plug of the kettle and said, how do you get the water in this? So I know he was as domesticated as me. Oh,
I know he used to poke the mugs and go, Rob, I can't work it.
Oh, yes. Rebecca, is there any more?
There are loads of questions. I think obviously we're running out of time, so maybe if we go for 2 more questions.
Yeah, let's go.
So we've got one question from Mark Jansen. Which one of Pratchett's characters was most like him in each of your opinions?
Okay. I'll jump in then with we need to mush up Vimes, Veterinary, Harry King, Granny Weatherwax, with a sprinkling of Nanny Og. Yeah, that'll do me. Yeah.
I was about to say veterinary and granny weatherwax.
Yes.
I think you can actually get it down to those two in a weird kind of way. But I want to hear what Rhianna has to say.
I'd probably say like a sprinkling of Nanny Og when he'd had a lot of ice wine, maybe. Yeah, I think there's a sort of there's a little bit of death. I think there's certainly a lot of granny, and the witches in particular were he took inspiration from his own grandmothers, so they were very rounded and grounded in real people, and Vimes, I think. So, but he is very much a combination of them, and yeah, I mean, I can see bits of myself in some of his like Susan and Tiffany and things like that, and of kind of my grandparents as well. But yeah, I think he is. I'd probably go a kind of Death Vimes, Granny Weatherwax triangle. I think. Fantastic. Somewhere in the middle of that.
Brilliant answers.
Amazing. And so for our final question, a few people have asked this. This is from Mark and Andre in particular. When you can expect an official Pratchett biography?
Well, let me tell you. Next year, next November, we're a year away from the 50th anniversary of the publication of The Carpet People. So, yes, it's going to be a busy year. That's all I'm saying for now. How do you get all of those anecdotes? We need Neil to tell us which printer he used for the Neil Gaiman reader, because we need that many pages, Neil, honestly. We need to know the printer that you used who can handle books that big.
It's I think 750 pages. It is, but I cannot wait to read your biography. I've told the story before, but I just remember once, a few years back, a couple of years before the end, being in a taxi and my phone rang and I answered the phone and it was Terry. And you were with him. And I'm assuming you must have dialed the number, because that would have been, we were back in full on Alzheimer's days. And Terry said, I'm working on something for my memoirs and I need you to help me remember something. And I just remember going, oh, Terry, you have Alzheimer's. I will be your memory, whatever you want. And I'm like, okay, I'm there. And he said, well, when we run the Good Omens tour in November 1990, and we did that interview with the ABC radio affiliate in New York, where the interviewer thought that Good Omens was an actual book that really was about a real person called Agnes Nutter, and you and I just led him on while the people in the back room who knew that it was fiction were beating against the walls and falling down and just laughing at the fact that their boss didn't have a clue. And then we walked out together onto the street and we walked down it singing They Might Be Giants, Shoehorn with Teeth. Was that 32nd Street or 34th? And I just remember, I'm like, I don't you're the one with Alzheimer's. I was meant to be, so.
That's perfect. I love that. I love that. I remember, Neil, you singing that very song to Terry in the library just down here. And that was the last time that you visited Terry here in the chapel. And Terry he wasn't saying a lot, didn't have a lot to say until you started singing. And then he started singing back. It was the strangest experience, because
Rob had gone out to get some food for us.
Yeah.
Scampi, as I remember.
Scampi, indeed it was Scampi.
And Terry and I sat there, and Terry was just going into his head and going further and further into his head. And I thought, I have to see if I can do something that will bring him out. And that was our song when we were on tour, whenever things would get too strange. And so I started singing, I want a shoehorn, the time of tea. People should get beat up for stating their belief. She wants a shoehorn, the time of tea. Because she knows there's no such thing. And Terry just sort of suddenly out of nowhere went, for she knows there's no such thing. And then we sang all the song through. He remembered lines that I didn't remember. You know, they ran out of gas, the plane will level out. And when we got to the end of the song, we talked, and he was back, and he was there. And I remember Rob saying that he hadn't seen Terry there for a while.
No.
And it was remarkable that just singing that song together brought him back from wherever he was to us for a little while.
I know we could do another hour on this easily, but can you remember the subsequent car journey back to the train station and what we discussed? Because I do.
That wasn't that where I got talked into doing Good Omens.
It was exactly that conversation where you, yeah, sorry about that. I do apologize. That's what we discussed on the way to the train station. A quick question from me to both of you before we go. Rhianna, we've got lots of exciting things. Are we likely to be working together on any of these very soon? Just requires a yes or no.
Yes.
Oh, there we go. That's all we need. Neil, is there anything that we're likely to be working on together again, maybe?
It's not beyond the bounds of possibility, Rob, but you know how these things go.
I'll just I'll let Terry and Neil sort it out together. There we go. That's all I'm saying about that. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Rhianna. Thank you, Neil. Love to you all. Thank you so much. Quite genuinely, where has an hour gone? Where has it gone? That was brilliant. Thank you so much to both of you, and thank you, Rebecca, and to the Senate House Library for hosting it for us. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you. It's wonderful to hear you recite all these memories of Terry and talk about his work. I'm sure everyone has absolutely loved it. It's incredible. I can see all the comments in the chat now speeding through. So much love for all you guys, and obviously it's a shame we can't see you all in person and give you a big round of applause, but just as when we say it's definitely there, and everyone sends their love and thanks for this wonderful opportunity. So thank you very much. A big thank you to you, Rhianna, Rob and Neil, for joining us tonight.
And
thank you.
Senate House Library.
Thank
you everyone for joining us. Obviously our program events very much depends on feedback that we get, so we'd be very grateful if you could spend 3 minutes just filling out the feedback form, which I'm just going to put in the chat there, and it will also be sent to you via email after the event via Eventbrite. So yes, thanks again to everyone, and for joining us for Being Human Festival, which continues to the 22nd of November with lots more fun events like this. So that's that, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your evening, and do join us for more events. And thanks once again to Rhianna, Rob and Neil. Thank you. A round of applause on behalf of everyone. Thank you.
Good night.